Hey, my name's Sarah Anastasio, and I read the book The Judsons of Burma by Virgil Robinson, which tells about the life of Adoniram Judson and how he chose to follow the Lord's leading to go to the lands of the heathen. He was born in 1788, and at the age of 3, he was already able to read the Bible, and by the age of 10, he could read almost anything that was in Greek. He was very inquisitive and wanted to try and know a reason for everything, and while he was at Brown University, he began to spend time with a friend that was atheist, and it caused Adoniram to have unbelief in all he had learned about the Lord. After Adoniram had graduated at the age of 20, he decided to go to New York to be an actor. However, he was in disbelief when he found out that his friend from college had passed away in the room next to him. And so Adoniram quit acting. He decided to return home, and while he was at home, he was encouraged to go and train for ministry. And so once he made that decision and trained for ministry, he was fully converted and became a sincere Christian. Adoniram had read a sermon during that time about a man who was the first Protestant missionary to a heathen land in India named William Carey. And during that time, Judson found his heart thrilling as he read how the light of the gospel was winning men and women from the worship of idols. His heart told him that this was something for him to do, and so Judson had decided that he would go and serve in Burma. At this time, there had been no Americans that had left to go and be a missionary to this heathen country, and so Judson had gathered a group of missionaries to talk to the leaders of churches and ask to be sent as missionaries. In June of 1810, a group of ministers of the Congregational Church in Massachusetts met together, and they had a meeting with Judson and 4 young men. And during that time, they boldly laid before the ministers a petition to have a mission society be formed. That they would be sent as missionaries to the heathen. As Judson read this petition, they were asked, "Why do you want to go so far away to work for souls? And are there not enough heathen living in our own country?" So therefore each man stood up and explained why they felt called to Burma. And on June 29th of 1810, the first mission society in America was formed. Adoniram had first met his future wife over lunch with the other missionaries in her home, and after not seeing her for about a month, he sent a letter asking for her hand in marriage and making a sacrifice to leave her homeland to go with him to Burma. All of her friends, all of her family were highly discouraging it, telling her this is crazy, you shouldn't go. But Anne had really just started to have a heart for the missions and for the Lord. And so in February of 1812, Adoniram and Anne Hasseltine got married in the same room of the house that they first met 2 years prior, and a day after getting married, she was able to witness her husband be ordained to go and be a missionary with 5 others. Anne Judson challenged Adoniram while at sea that he could go and share the gospel in Burma, even if that's where he has always wanted to go, even if the empire was closed to Christian missions. And so during that time at sea, he had shared how he was interested in becoming a Baptist and getting baptized by immersion as he had been reading that in the Word of God. But Anne had gotten very upset because the Congregational Mission Society were the ones who sent him. And so June 17th, after about 4 months of being at sea, they were finally able to walk on dry land and meet Dr. William Carey. And 6 weeks after they had arrived, Samuel Knott, Gordon Hall, and Luther Rice immediately joined their fellow missionaries at the mission hospital where Dr. Carey was working. And so during their time talking and meeting with Dr. Carey, Adoniram and Anne finally were able to have a conversation with him about baptism by immersion. And by the end of the conversation, both Adoniram and Anne were under conviction. They decided to be baptized by immersion, and then they knew afterwards they had to withdraw from the Congregationalist Mission Society. So Carey had offered to allow their treasury people to support them until they were able to find some Baptists of America to help support them. All of the missionaries at the time had decided to go to the Isle of France. However, all the missionaries had agreed that this was not the location of the mission field because they wanted to preach where Christ was not known. So once arriving in Burma, probably around 1815, both Adoniram and Anne had been going through all of their language study, and they were able to talk a little bit more fluently in the Burmese tongue, and so they became more confident in preaching the Word of God in their language. And so there were hardships living in Burma that had left Anne weak, and she was also known as Nancy as well. And went by that a lot. But there was no doctor in Burma. So they were granted by a governor to go to Madras to get Anne well, and so she told Judson to stay in Burma because there were a group of Burmese men who had been coming every week to listen, and she knew that they would slip back into the darkness if he were to leave to go with her. And so she told him that, the Lord's going to take care of me just like he always has. And so she was able to return after 6 weeks of finally getting better. Christmas Day of 1817, he decided that Adoniram decided he was going to set sail to go to Chittagong from Rangoon. They hadn't seen any conversions happen yet, and they just wanted to go to Chittagong to be able to try and find a Burmese Christian that would be willing to come back with Adoniram to help try and preach the gospel to the Burmese, native to native. Judson eventually came home after 8 months. They had built a chapel, and a man named Mong Nao was the first man who had asked how he might learn about the Jesus religion. He would go to the Judsons' home. He would talk about Jesus for hours until he accepted Christ and asked to be baptized. And so Mong Nao came back with a group of friends to the church, and he told publicly of the joy he found in Jesus. And so there were many curious Burmese that followed and watched him be baptized. And after 6 years of ministry in Burma, both Anne and Adoniram were finally able to begin to see fruit of their labor. And so 5 months later, after Mong Nao, 2 other believers came forward, Mong Thala and Mong Baya. They handed Mr. Judson a paper stating their belief in Jesus and requesting baptism, knowing that there were dangers in becoming a Christian, knowing that it may cost them everything they have, even their lives. And so one of them had stated to Adoniram how when they meditate on this religion of Christianity, that they no longer love their own life. And unfortunately, during that time, word got to the king, and so the king sent spies out over this Christian group. And so Judson and Mr. Coleman, they decided to make a trip to the Golden City of Ava to meet with the king and ask that he would grant permission for his people to become Christians if they choose to. And he said, no Burma has the right to forsake the religion of Buddha. And so Adoniram and Anne, they finally got back to Rangoon and were like, you know what? They're telling the new converts to save you guys from persecution. We don't want you to lose your lives. We're going to go ahead and move to another city. And the new converts had shared with them, no, please stay until there's at least 10 converts before you leave us and move on. And so they agreed to stay, and they rotated, and so only a few people would go to the house church at night just so the king wouldn't get suspicious again. During that time, Anne grew ill, and after 10 years she set sail back to the U.S., and so she spent 2 years there. And during that time, Adoniram had finished translating the New Testament in Burmese. He also wrote other important books, and he had started a Burmese English dictionary, the task that would basically take on the rest of his life. And even though the lonelier he had become, the harder he began to study and the more diligent he worked. 2 years later, a war broke out between Great Britain and Burma, and Dr. Price and Adoniram were put in jail. And the king and the Burmese people thought that Judson and Dr. Price were spies, and so with Great Britain. And so even though there were hardships and there were turmoil, Anne still continued to find ways to visit the prison daily, and she would always ask the governor to release the missionaries. And during that time, she gave birth to a little girl named Maria. She was able to ask the governor, when Adoniram had begun to fall ill, if she could make a little room in the prison to care for her husband, and they agreed. And so one day the governor asked to meet with Anne, and when she returned back to the prison, there was no one there. And the governor had no clue where she was, but she just advised him, you know what, go home, take care of yourself, take care of your kids, because he couldn't promise that Adoniram was still alive. And eventually, after 15 months, Judson was released from prison. He was asked to go to the city of Ava and meet with the king and be a peace negotiator for the British. And so, unfortunately, Anne could not go, and therefore she went back home to care for the kids. However, she felt very ill, and she knew she was going to die, and so the Burmese women agreed to care for her children. Dr. Price, when he was released from prison the very day she was stricken with sickness, he was hoping that he was going to make it to her in time to help her. And so Adoniram, he spent 4 years in the capital, never saw a single convert. When he was released, he was able to come home, but he came home to a very sick child and a wife, and he wasn't discouraged. He wasn't discouraged that he didn't see a single convert in 4 years. Even while in the darkness and the anguish of prison, he was able to see the hand of God in the events that took place. Christians had scattered, and the little chapel was broken down due to war, but when it became known to the missionaries who were back, some of the faithful converts came back to join them. Adoniram and Anne decided that they were going to go to a new mission, a new city called Amherst that was carved out of the jungle, and it would become a capital of the British Burma. And so Adoniram began to build a home for his wife and his kids. And so Judson pressed on in his great work of translating the Old Testament in Burmese. And at that time, Mr. Judson was arrested in Ava in 1824. He had completed all the New Testament and part of the Old Testament, and Anne knew how important the Bible would be to him, and so she was determined to smuggle it into the prison. And so she sewed it into a pillow. She told the guards she wanted to make her husband more comfortable at night, and when she gave him the prison, she whispered, "Your Burmese Bible." And so once he was released from jail and he came home, on July 5th, 1826, Mr. Judson rode away with a British commissioner, Mr. Crawford, to sign a peace treaty. Stipulated that Burma was to sign a commercial treaty with Great Britain, and he was going to draw it up, but he needed an interpreter, so he asked Adoniram to go with him. Adoniram didn't want to go, but he shared how he wanted to insert a requirement in this treaty that the Burmese government is to grant religious freedom to all subjects. And so he decided to go, and on October 24th, he received word that his wife had died along with his daughter Maria. During that time, Judson went back to the task of translating the Old Testament. He distributed tracts. He preached hundreds of sermons. Judson went from city to city, town to town, village to village. The number of Christians just continued to grow amazingly, and so the king just continued to be more furious at his command, and it just continued to drive him more and more to go to each village. And as the Christian converts had said so boldly 10 years prior, the religion's going to spread itself. The king's going to be able to do nothing to stop it. And so more missionaries continued to enter Burma. 8 years after Anne's death, Adoniram married a woman named Sarah Boardman, whose husband had also been a missionary, had been fallen at his post after a short attack of fever. Sadly, Sarah became ill. The doctors told her she needed to return back to her homeland, so he went back with her. She passed away along with 3 of their kids, and Adoniram got married one more time to an Emily Shubbuck of New York, and she united her life with promising to go wherever the future might hold. And so they went back to Burma, and he was able to finish the first part of the Burmese dictionary that was printed in 1849, containing more than 600 pages. However, he grew ill and said, "If it's the Lord's will for me to live, then so be it. Yes, if it is the Lord's will, I should like to complete the dictionary so much. I feel as though I'm only beginning to be useful," is what he said. However, he did not recover as they set sail of the Bay of Bengal, as many of the Burmese people knew they would never see their teacher again. And on April 12, 1850, Judson passed away and was buried into the blue waters of the Indian Ocean. And so this was really a great book. I read it, short read, but I had always heard about Adoniram in classes, but never really read his story. And it was just really encouraging. Through all of the persecution that held, he still continued to be faithful. He was able to translate the New and Old Testament, other books, even through 6 years of not seeing any fruit come, he was able to see converts. And then after being in prison all that time, coming back and seeing a Christian nation being formed, and Christianity was just spreading, and the king couldn't do anything because it just spread on its own. And it was just really encouraging just to see his faithfulness through everything. And so I would just really encourage it if you want to read it. It's a great book, and finish strong in your finals.